It's not that they're late.
It's that we're early.
And they're going to come in probably any second now. So Claire and I decided we're going to record our introduction before we record the episode as a little game for you feast readers. So Claire, what are we going to hear this episode?
Oh, I think this episode we're going to hear a lot about being, and especially maybe about the different age groups in which we fall into as people in the room.
Who's here?
We're joined by Professor Jonathan Stadler, who is a psychology professor here on campus, and Sebastian Rosenthal, who is a business major, and also Jaksyn and me, Claire Marcus. And I think probably we'll talk a lot about music.
Maybe so.
Those are my predictions.
I'm excited to dig into John Stadler's 90s music taste.
Yeah.
We'll find some overlap there. So, see how we do. Listen to this episode. All right. I think we got our levels as good as they're going to get right now.
In a world.
Right. Keep those mics aimed at you. You know what? That In a World guy, that voice, was a classmate of my wife's father. And you went to school with my wife at St. Croix.
Really?
Yeah, Jennifer Roach.
Huh. Yeah. Okay.
Jennifer and Rebecca Roach.
Okay.
Sisters.
Oh, wow.
So I've heard stories.
Look at that.
Wow. Great. Which means you probably also have access to the yearbooks.
Great. Yeah, it's like before Facebook. This is not a surprise. You know, like your youth is still on display in print form.
Yes. They actually digitized them all. So recently someone, one of my classmates sent me the link. And so you can go to all of the yearbooks at St. Croix through the years. So I was digging them up and showing my kids.
I'm marveling at your voice. You sound so good in these headphones.
Oh,
Thank you. Do you hear that?
Yeah, he sounds great.
You are that voice, that In a World voice.
Yes.
Well, who are you?
I used to pull my Rod Serling.
Oh, let's do that.
Let's see. Today we are venturing into the unknown, a world of sight, a world of sound. So,
the world of Whistle the Feast. Who is that voice?
Rod Serling?
No, you.
Oh, me. This is John Stadler.
Good. Good. And this is Jason Jaspersen. Who's that voice?
This is Sebastian Rosenthal.
Sebastian Rosenthal.
And Claire Marcus.
All right. We made it. Well, welcome to this episode of Whistle the Feast. This is really Claire's idea.
Was it?
I think.
Well, you said, I want him after one of his presentations. And I said, oh, okay. And then we waited for a bit, and then we you were like, who's the student? And then we went through a list of ideas, and Sebastian won.
Yeah.
So.
Behind the scenes. That's how it works. So those presentations, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about your sabbatical.
Sure, absolutely.
And those resulting presentations and conclusions that you come to. Kinds of things that you learned. And then we'll run our cycle on that, and then I've got some more stuff I want to get into.
Okay, sounds good. I'm up for it. So what would you like me to start talking about?
Well, let's go back. Let's go back to applying.
Okay.
Applying for a sabbatical, and let's talk about the sabbatical system.
So what we have to do is we have an application that we fill out. It's a multi-page form, and we have to provide what our project is, how it can benefit the college, how it can benefit our students, and then we have to have some objectives so that there are outcomes that proved that we weren't just, hanging out in the Bahamas the whole time and drinking Mai Tais. So that's basically the kind of the process. And
whoever makes that rule doesn't understand Sabbath.
Right. Not to worry, I did actually take time to rest. But the idea is that you get to step away from the normal routine to do something else that might be of interest to you, that would enhance your intellectual or spiritual development and so forth by taking you kind of out of the normal routine.
Okay, so is there any way for us to talk about the rationale? Why do we have sabbatical? And I know that there's a qualification. We should maybe get that on the air too.
Well, so I can't speak specifically to Bethany, but I've been at other institutions. And in fact, at my previous institution, Fisk University, I had completed my 7 years. So sabbaticals usually come every 7 years in academia. And so I had completed my 7 years at Fisk. And so I was going to be eligible for my sabbatical. And then I applied and got the position here. And so it basically reset the 7 years. And so the tradition is keeping with the idea of the Sabbath, that you kind of work for 7 years and then you get a year. And so it is kind of still
a reflection of the week.
Yeah.
7 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it should really be 6 years and then you get a sabbatical,
Sure.
but they have 7 years. Okay. And that's typical of most institutions that have a sabbatical system, is that it's 7 years of work and then you apply and then you can get a 1 year or usually 1 semester or 1 year reprieve from your normal work to do other things.
Okay. And tell us about your application.
So my application was to explore in a little bit more depth the idea of integration between the field of psychology and the Christian faith. And our department since 2014 had kind of made that an emphasis. But I hadn't really had an opportunity to kind of like go into a little bit more depth personally in terms of thinking that through. And so from 2014 until I applied for the sabbatical, as a department, we had been looking at integration. We had been trying to do it. And for our capstone, I had been trying to emphasize to our students how to think about integration. And so we had a couple of textbooks that had helped inform how we approached integration of faith with psychology. But I hadn't had an opportunity to really kind of find more resources, dig into thinking through kind of theoretically what that would mean and how then I could bring that any new insights back into kind of the pedagogy or into thinking through that with our students.
All right. So integration of faith with psychology, I think there's a lot bundled up into that idea.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of different ways of thinking about that. And that's one of the things I discovered, was that there are a lot of different models for how that could be done with the field of psychology.
Why? Why are there different ways?
Because to some extent, this question starts to, or begins with questions about one's worldview. And so now you're getting into kind of the deeper philosophical questions of ontology, epistemology, axiology, anthropology. Let's see, what else have I missed? Oh, cosmology, and I know there's one more. Oh, teleology.
So before we go too far, can you go back over that list and give us definitions?
Sure. So ontology has to do with what is kind of the structure of reality. And cosmology has to do with, well, why does anything exist versus not exist? So that's cosmology and ontology. And so those tend to be the kind of first foundational questions that people attempt to answer. Whether they do so formally or informally, we all have a sense for why we're here or why the universe exists, and then what the nature of reality is. Is it just physical? Is it physical and more? So that's cosmology and ontology. Then the next question is one of, well, how do we know things? And that's epistemology. Following epistemology, we have teleology, which is, what is our purpose? Why do we exist? So not so much do we exist or what exists and so forth, but why? What's the purpose? What's the reasoning behind our existence? So that's teleology. And then we get to anthropology, which is, what is the nature of humans? And then finally we get to axiology, which is what some would refer to as ethics. So what is the nature of right and wrong? And so those are kind of the big questions that often inform our worldviews. And depending on how you answer those questions, then you come to different understanding of, for instance, what is science? What's the purpose of science? And then that informs, for instance, is it possible to integrate one's faith with a scientific field or not? Mm-hmm. And if so, how do you do that?
When you went through that list, I started thinking this sounds like Augsburg Confession.
To some extent, absolutely, because the Augsburg Confession and almost every faith confession, whether we're talking about Augsburg, Heidelberg, or so forth, they're all attempting to answer all of those questions. And ultimately, that's what the Bible does. If you dig through, the Bible is giving answers to all of those questions as well.
So right now we're working on the train of thought. Why are they different? Why is it possible to answer integrating faith with psychology in different ways? And you wanted time to explore this and come to some kind of a conclusion?
So I haven't come to the model that works for even, I would say, for me. I'm still trying to wrestle with some of those questions. And what I've learned is that people who are faithful Christians will come to different answers. And so one of the things I try to teach my students is there isn't necessarily one correct model, because, for instance, one big question is, well, how are you conceptualizing what psychology is? So are you conceptualizing it as an area of study? And so we're talking like basic science kinds of questions, or are you looking at it as a helping field? And so even that starts to muddy the waters in terms of coming up with a unitary, singular answer to how you integrate the field of psychology with the Christian faith.
So maybe to make a parallel, is it like comparing a professional athlete with a personal trainer?
To some extent, yeah. Or it might be comparing a professional athlete with a exercise physiologist.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant.
Yeah. But yeah, that would maybe be a good parallel, is that one is very applied. It's like, how do you put this into practice so that you can be the best that you can be, versus how do we understand the underlying principles of, say, muscle firing and so forth?
So when we hear about the trivium, this time-tested concept of how to educate a human, trivium followed by quadrivium. The trivium starting out with grammar, and then logic, and finally rhetoric. What I'm hearing from you is, so far, dealing with a lot of grammar. You're trying to define the terms.
Yes.
You're saying it depends on what you say psychology is, or epistemology, teleological questions, We have to define the terms so that the logic can follow.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And then finally, so that we know how to talk about it.
Right. And that is what I've discovered is probably a lot of the sticking points, is that the grammar is not necessarily agreed upon in terms of, so for instance, there are some Christians who suggest we just need to scrap the whole thing and create like a biblical version of psychology that doesn't rely on anything that comes from the secular world. And that's kind of one extreme of how you define psychology. Basically, it's soul care, and that's all psychology should be. And then on the other end, you have those who say it needs to be completely objective. It needs to be treated like a natural science, like physics and so forth. And therefore, there's no room for anything that's metaphysical, that is values laden, etc.
And didn't you just do subjective, objective?
To some extent, yeah. And that's where the tension is, because a number of Christians who are thinking about this are like, we have to balance the object and the subject of what it means to be human. But you have some of those extreme voices on along the spectrum saying, no, we must treat the human as an object. We must treat the human as a subject. And then there's variations in between about how you try to balance those two.
So you've just given us a tour of the barbed wire. Right? Now we understand this is not easy.
Right.
Tell us about the sabbatical.
So the first thing I did was I tried to come up with my list of sources. So I dug through and found a number of sources, some of which I then ordered so that I would have copies of them and so forth. And I came up, I think my bibliography of sources ended up being about 77 sources, which I have not gotten through, to be honest. But you have to start somewhere. You start with going, these are the sources that I think would be valuable. And so they kind of spanned from kind of like strictly psychological writings to strictly theological, and then kind of everything all over the place.
Just also to be clear, we didn't really get into when your sabbatical was.
Oh, so the sabbatical technically started in August of 2024 and then went through December of 2024. Because it started in August, that technically meant I also had some of the summer from like May through August that I could have also been using for the sabbatical.
We're now recording in February of 2026.
Right.
You're still working through your works.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because I realized that the application or the proposal was perhaps more aspirational than realistic in terms of saying, okay, I'm going to get these amount of sources and then I'm going to plow through these sources and so forth. And it was just like, okay, that's a lot of sources, and some of them are something that you can't just like read through quickly. You kind of have to take your time and meditate on what the author is saying and wrestle with the implications and so forth. And so I have probably gotten through maybe a third to 40% of the resources that I had accumulated.
So we consider this integration of faith with psychology a work in progress.
Oh, absolutely.
You're still developing.
Yes. And the thing I tell my students is that to some extent, this is kind of a never-ending project, because to some extent I have been working on the integration since I was 23 in grad school. It's just that I'm in a much different place. Yeah, I'm in a much different place than I was when I was 23 in terms of thinking about this.
Okay. Is there anything you can tell us for sure based on the time that you've spent?
So what I can say for sure is that a particular framework that I came across that we use in our department, I think is a really good basis for trying to understand what it means to try to be a Christian in psychology. And it comes down to what we call the 5 biblical themes of what it means to be human. And so this comes from the work of Mose and Tellinghausen.
Wait a minute. Do you know these things?
Yeah, no, I'll find
Let's let the students prove themselves.
Okay. Well, they have a bit of an advantage because we developed a mnemonic device to help them remember what it is.
Okay, so they're
Claire,
cheaters.
Yeah.
Hey.
So Claire can tell you what the mnemonic device is, and then she can tell you what the 5 themes are.
Every man really, really believes. E is for embodied. We are embodied, which means you're biologically informed, obviously. M is meaning seekers. Humans are meaning seekers. Do you want to do one of the R's?
One is relational.
Good job. Second one is responsible limited agents. So you have agency, but you also are like confined to laws. And B stands for broken in need of redemption.
That feels like you got something.
Yeah, this framework was probably, to some extent, I would say, a game changer for our department when we came across this book by these two professors who are at, I believe, Calvin College in Michigan. Yeah, at the time it was Calvin College, and so Mose and Tullinghausen wrote this book called Exploring Psychology and Christian Faith, an Introduction. And that's where they introduced this kind of framework of the 5 biblical themes of human nature.
Is it safe to say that there's a big battle that predates those 5 nice little packaged phrases?
I would say that every one of them is contended in the field of psychology.
Yeah, and battle, I didn't mean contention, I just meant earned, like really a difficult concept to distill and consolidate.
I think what they did was incredible, because I would have probably vaguely had a notion that all of those things are a good summary, but I don't think I could have finally distilled it down into kind of these 5 themes. So yeah, what they did was an incredible job of kind of distillation of biblical truth into 5 kind of pithy, understandable statements.
Right, and then, well, where does the mnemonic phrase come from?
Dr. Kalm, I think, made that. So that's not the order that they have it listed.
Yeah, they come in a different order.
Yeah. Sure. So, and in fact, I've now thought that it should be a different order than either of those two. But their order starts with relational. So they start with relational, and then they go to broken, in need of redemption. So they are informed by Reformed Christianity. And so I think that makes sense, because they are looking at kind of creation, fall, redemption as kind of their framework. That's typical of
like
kind of Reformed
sequence?
theology. Yeah. And so that's why they have relational. So that's kind of pre-fall. We were built for relationship with God, with each other, and with creation.
Sure.
But then the fall happens, and now we're broken, in need of redemption. Third, they have embodied. Then they have responsible limited agents. And then finally, they have meaning seekers. And so that's kind of the order they have. But I think Gen Com had a difficult time coming up with a mnemonic with their order. And so as a result, every man really, really believes is kind of a nice way of still having those 5 themes together.
This package of 5 ideas, does it need to be a hierarchy or a progression?
I don't know that it necessarily has to. I'm thinking kind of, again, from a theoretical standpoint, it would make sense to probably have embodied and relational first. You can switch the order if you wish, but again, I kind of like that idea that it represents kind of how we are even apart from the fall, that we are both embodied and we are relational, and that's the way God created us to be. Then we're broken in need of redemption. As a result of that, well, actually, I could even put meaning seekers before broken. But then broken and responsible limited agents, I think, is probably, I would put kind of the last 2, because it reminds us of our finitude, of our limits, partly because of sin, but also partly because we are creatures, not the creator. So
that stance that you just said, we are creatures, not the creator, I'm not convinced that all humanity believes that.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, just ask the transhumanists.
And I think that clear statement needs to be just understood. Where is your place in the cosmology
right now?
Yeah. That's one of the wonderful things that one of the resources also provided. Not these authors, but I also have a book that we had sometimes used called Coming to Peace with Psychology. And it was written by a Christian in the field of psychology. And in one of his early chapters, he kind of breaks down the relationship of the creator with the creation. And he says, well, in one understanding, there's the creator and a hard line and everything else, including humans, animals, etc. But in another sense, there's the creator and humans, and then there's a hard line and everything else. And I think both of those things are really kind of important to remember, because yes, the creator is separate. God is sufficient in and of himself, and then the rest of us are contingent. But humans are made in his image, at least before the fall, and therefore we also stand apart from the creation in very important ways. And in that way, because of the relationship that we have with God, that puts us kind of above the line as well.
I've been noticing the way the gospel is a progression of God coming closer and closer to humans.
Mm-hmm.
So that, that broken moment, like the relation was there and then the break. But then God approaches in something like Sinai. And then God approaches in Jesus. And there's the demonstration of the embodied.
Yeah.
And then the Holy Spirit inhabits us.
Yeah.
The sacraments are ingested.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of them is.
But it's a really good way of understanding that embodiedness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That we're not okay. So I'm really happy that embodied is part of that. As an artist, it's become apparent and surprising to me that the incarnation of Christ is a great validation for a visual artist.
Mm.
When I make things out of matter, and let's take another one from your list, meaning, when I make meaning out of matter, that's not only God the Father at creation shaping clay and bringing the world into being, it's the shape that God chose to take himself.
Yeah.
He became flesh. He didn't have to do it that way, but chose to. And when he tells parables, it's always in an understandable, material way.
Right. Very earthy.
Very earthy. Things that we're familiar with. So, when I graduated from my studio art degree, not long after I started teaching high school at MVL. And I started to realize that I had been in different worlds. Graduated from MSU, and, there's a whole different paradigm there. But also just studying art has its sort of jargon, its language, its understandings about what it is we're doing, why it exists. It's like a subculture. You just like, you get each other. You understand how this works. You don't have to explain. But then I come to MVL, or I come home, or I'm in church, and the people around me don't understand those things.
I completely understand where you're going.
There you go. So I kind of came around sideways, and I expect that happens to you too. Are you building bridges?
The short answer is probably not, or not in the way that I probably could be or should be. But the longer answer is perhaps I am indirectly, by trying to equip our students so that our students can have an answer to why are you in psychology as a Christian. So I think, or what I hope, is that maybe I'm equipping our students with being able to make that bridge, so that, because maybe like artists,
You're pouring pilings.
Yeah, because psychologists who are Christians often find themselves as people with no country, because academic psychologists are suspicious of those of faith, and then people in the church are suspicious of psychologists. And so to some extent, there's always this kind of like, oh, like if I'm at a church and someone says, oh, you're a psychologist, it's like, you're not quite one of us. And I don't think
And
they
vice
mean
versa.
it. Yeah.
Vice versa if you're at a conference or something.
Right. Absolutely. And if I'm at a conference, like, oh, I'm in the psychology department at Bethany Lutheran College. Like, oh, it's a Christian college. It's kind of like, oh, I'm not sure if you're one of us.
In the words of Kendrick Lamar.
You're right.
They're not like us.
So it's funny because you feel when you have a foot in each world, you sometimes don't feel like you have stable footing because of that.
Yeah, so I'm commiserating on that because that's something that I've felt intensely, and it's a lonely place to be. But I do think I appreciate your stance that you're preparing a different kind of environment.
Yeah, that's the hope, that if our students can feel more kind of comfortable in their own skin as Christians who are studying psychology, I think that's of great benefit for them, because that was not something that I was given when I was an undergrad, but partly because I was also not at a Christian college.
You guys are doing the same thing right now. He's creating things he was never given. You're just telling me about projects you're working on that don't exist. Like the imagery doesn't exist for sculptures that Jaksyn has in mind that he's like bringing to reality. But you're like doing the same thing but differently. Just thought I'd chime in with that.
No, that's where I'm going.
Good. Well, keep going.
Yeah. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why would you do that?
Probably out of the sense of what I didn't have myself. The fact that I want things to be better for others than they were for me. And what's interesting is when I said, as an undergrad at a secular college, of course, you would be doing all your stuff, classwork and so forth. And then on Sunday, you would go worship at the church in the college town and so forth. But it was like those two worlds were completely separate. Like the people at this small little church in Mount Vernon, Iowa, they really didn't know what was going on up at the hilltop at Cornell. And the other days of the week, the people in my dorms and the people in my class and so forth didn't necessarily know that every Sunday I was going down to this little church service. And it was kind of like there was this dichotomy, or maybe that's not quite the right word, but it was like you kind of had to split your identity, and we always talk about how your faith isn't supposed to be a Sunday only thing. And it wasn't necessarily that was true. But in terms of how I kind of felt my identity it was absolutely true that kind of these two worlds were not integrated at all, which is probably why I was so interested in graduate school about this idea of integration.
That was in your early 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in graduate school, you were already working on this.
Yes. And I fortunately had come into a community of fellow Christian grad students. If that had not happened, I don't know that I would have ever asked the questions or thought about it. And so in the early 90s, when I was in grad school, there was this really important book that came out called The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind, written by Mark Knoll. And the thesis was basically the scandal of the evangelical mind is that there is not much of one. And
whoa,
yeah. And so the book was talking about how evangelical Christians historically had always been very active and not contemplative. And so as a result, they tended not to really care about the life of the mind. They wanted action. They wanted to be able to, fight slavery and, do this, that, and the other thing to make the world better for Christ and so forth. But they didn't have a tradition of contemplation like, for instance, Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions did. And so what Mark Knoll was pointing out is that in the history of American evangelicalism, there just really wasn't much of a life of mind tradition.
Get her done.
Yeah. And so that book came out about the time I was in grad school. And so there was a book study by the Graduate Christian Fellowship, which was a branch of InterVarsity. And so I saw the flyers around campus and was like, oh, that looks interesting. And so I went to the book study, started to make connections, went to the next book study, and pretty much had developed then this community of Christians in graduate school who were all interested in this idea that as Christians in the academy, how do we operate? And how do we do so in a way that is integrative so that we don't bifurcate ourselves?
We were becoming the answer.
Yeah, through praxis.
Let's go back further. Why study psychology in college?
That's kind of funny. I didn't necessarily, it was one of many options, but engineering was also an option. And I was in my freshman year and I did well in my psychology class. And then because I had done well in high school math, I had tested out of Calc 1 for college. And so I was like, oh, well, if I want to be an engineer, I have to take physics. Well, you had to take calc-based physics for the engineering track. So I had to jump into calc-based physics, but I had not had any calc. And so I was struggling to have to try and learn calculus and physics at the same time. And it was horrific. And that pretty much ended my engineering career. And so then I kind of floundered during the rest of my freshman year trying to figure out what am I going to do. And I think the fall of my sophomore year, I took another psych class and I enjoyed it. And finally, I think it was the beginning of spring semester, you had to declare your major. So I was like, I guess I'll declare psych. So it wasn't really kind of a plan per se. It was something where...
This needs to be heard.
Well, absolutely. And getting into grad school was not a plan like, I want to, do this, that, or the other thing. I mean, this is where, again, I think our students are way ahead of where I was as an undergrad because of our professional development courses that allow them to explore in very intensive and intentional ways. For me, I was really good at academics and I didn't want to have to put together a resume and go out and get a job. So I was like, I'll just do more schooling. And that's what caused me to go to grad school, was basically I didn't want to get a job.
Okay, and so you have to shrug, like you have to say, I'm going to study something. Well, I'm already in psychology. So.
Exactly. And
guys, this is how it works.
Yeah.
Everybody's an accident.
And so I applied to like a crazy number of graduate programs across the spectrum. Like I ended up getting into a neuroscience program, but I applied to like 3 clinical programs. And I had done an internship at the Chicago Home for Boys and Girls in like downtown Chicago, very kind of clinical oriented internship. And I did not get into a single clinical program, but I got accepted to this neuroscience program, a developmental psych program, and ultimately chose the neuroscience program.
I misspoke a second ago. God can work with anything.
Yeah.
And I just think I hit this home several times on this podcast, that if you're a young person, a college-age person trying to think about your future, and you start talking to adults about their life, start tracing like the winding road to what seems so obvious and so core to their identity. Everybody has been as lost and confused as everybody in college feels like they are. And then one opportunity becomes another opportunity, and the doors open and you walk through them.
Absolutely. And I shouldn't have even been a college professor. After I went to grad school, I struggled. It took me 9 years to get my PhD, which the average is supposed to be 5. And it was because I had come into grad school with a lack of focus. I didn't know why I was there. And so as a result, it was a real struggle. And at some point I was like, I have to get out because I don't want the odometer to turn over to a second digit. I don't want to have to say I've been here a decade. And so again, there was really not a purpose behind why I was going to try and finish. Plus, my advisor had had a quadruple bypass surgery the year before. And that made me realize if he dies, so does my career, because nobody else was doing his research. And so there would have been no option for me after 8 years in grad school if he was no longer able to be my advisor. And so that kind of really put kind of like the fire under my butt going, okay, I got to finish up.
You had some serious nudges.
Yeah. Plus, somewhere around year 7 or 8, I started to being referred to in whispered tones like, oh, that's that guy who's been here forever. And what was funny was in my first year or second year, there was a guy that we used to talk about like that. And I was like,
That's
oh,
so
crap,
funny. I've
become that guy. like there was this guy whose graduate office, he had this dead plant in the window. And so I didn't have a dead plant, but it was one of these things where it's like, we used to talk about sightings of this guy randomly. And somewhere around 7 or 8 years, now I was the one who they were having sightings of. And it was like, okay, I got to get done.
Yep.
And then when I was finishing up, I was actually planning to get a job at either Blockbuster or Starbucks. Like I was just going to wash my palate of academia completely. And then a friend,
That's crazy.
And then a friend of mine, in fact, I had completed the application and submitted it to Blockbuster. And I had the Starbucks application filled out. And before I submitted that, a friend from grad school who was teaching at Fisk University called and said, hey, they have a 1-year appointment. Would you like to apply for it? And the one thing that I found I enjoyed in grad school was being a TA. So they're like, sure, I'll do that for a year. And then 1 year became 2 years. 2 years became 3 years. And then I ended up on the 10-year clock. Completely not part of the plan.
Yeah, so like Schrodinger's future, right? I mean, it forks in the road and, one thing happens or another thing happens.
Yep. So I wouldn't be here if they had accepted my application to Blockbuster.
Wow.
Close call.
Yep.
They could have had him.
And yeah, like maybe you wanted them to accept at that time. You wanted them to accept that.
I would have loved just watching movies all day and so forth. It would have been so much fun. But it also, I have no idea what my life would have been like if that's the path I had taken. Because once you kind of get off that path, it's very difficult to get back on it.
Sure.
Because the typical path would have been I would have gone on and done research as a postdoctoral student in someone's lab, built up my resume, and then applied to like a top 25 research university to try and get a position. And none of that appealed to me. But like I said, 1 year or 2 years away from that, it becomes very difficult even to, for instance, try to get a teaching job.
So I want to hear kind of students' responses to that. You wanted Dr. Stadler here, right? You admire him.
Well, to consider that one of the professors that I consider like one of the smartest guys I know could have been working at a Blockbuster is insane to me. Like,
not anymore.
We leave his class every day and we're like, holy cow. How did he just lecture about all that stuff? Like, and it's like the amount of people that I know who also have that same reaction of like, he just knows his stuff. Like you would never believe that. Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Yeah, the Starbucks thing was really funny because I wanted to be able to have the pedigree to be as snooty as Starbucks baristas usually are. So like, because most of the time they're kind of like really like, oh, I know so much. And I was thinking I could actually say I have a PhD,
Right.
so I deserve to be snooty as your
so
barista.
funny.
I think after our first or second social psych class, Claire and I are in social psychology with Dr. Stadler. And I was like, I was so impressed by the fact that literally any question you ask him, he seems like he's been waiting. Like he's so
Yeah.
ready to answer it. He's like, oh yeah, it's probably this, and then like this thing. It's like you can ask him any question out of like any realm, and it's like he's been waiting for you to ask, so he can like
Yeah.
answer it and turn it into some connection, and then just he's one of the most incredible teachers we've ever had. And like Claire said,
Right.
we're literally amazed. And so the fact that like he was like, yeah, I don't know if I'll do psychology, like, and then
Well, yeah, and like you're
grad
literally
school.
building something right now. Like you're creating a new like integration model, and you're like, yeah, might not have been here. That's crazy.
Blockbuster almost got him.
Yep.
Wow.
Sebastian, I hear you're going to get into woodworking.
Claire told you. That's
No, Claire didn't tell me.
no.
Nope, he found out.
Claire did tell me, but she wasn't the only one.
Okay.
Anyways, talk about that.
Well, I had this desire probably November-ish of where I was like, I need a creative outlet. I was sitting there and I'm taking my business classes because I'm a business major. And I was like, man, if I do this my whole life, like, I'm going to go crazy probably. Like, I want to do as a job, but like, if it's the only thing I do.
Why do you say that?
Well, for context, this morning Claire and I were talking about just the interesting thing of being a business major, but I have a psych and communication minors. And the difference between business classes and like psych classes, and how, to me, business classes are very like, here's this information, like this is how, like I'm taking accounting, it's like this ratio does this ratio tells you this thing. It's very just like, this is how it is, this is how you use it, boom, boom. Like you're just gaining that information, but there's no deep diving, there's no exploration. Where I go to social psych and it's like, we're learning all these things of like, there's all these different like tendencies that you fall into, and like just understanding the human people and like how we work, and how that's so much more fulfilling and like just in depth, if that makes sense. And just, I have been thinking about this for a long time. And so I've kind of hit this point of like, if I just talk business, I feel like I might reach this point of just like being a superficial individual of like, there's no depth to me, right? It's just like, I do numbers, I can make money, and that's what I do. And that's not how I want to be, I guess. I don't want to be that way. And so woodworking was actually something I did as a kid for a while. My dad would have scrap wood in the garage, and I'd go out and I'd be like, what if I took this screw and I just screwed these together? And I would just like build these random things. And that love has like been reunited recently. And so my goal for the year is to make a bookshelf at some point. See if I can pull that off. I got to really dedicate to that.
Come use the sculpture shop. I've got your tools. I've got your workbenches.
That's what I've heard. But yeah, to be able to do a thing I enjoy, I do enjoy the business, otherwise I wouldn't be studying it, but to also have a thing to go from that and be creative and to explore and to build myself and to add depth to who I am as a person, I guess is kind of where that's stemming from.
You just described the liberal arts in a few ways. The integration of different fields within you, but also the idea of liberal arts as opposed to the servile arts. Liberal arts are the things that we study that can make us free, as opposed to the things that we study that can make somebody else rich. So the concept of wanting to make something and then being able to just apply yourself and make decisions, to have choices about what you make and choices about how you spend your time. What kind of life do you want to lead? This is the question that you're confronting. Mm-hmm. You can go all kinds of directions, and you go to Blockbuster.
As it goes, we'll play the Blockbuster.
But I think that's a fascinating thing to think about with you. I don't know you very well, and I want to. Woodworking does surprising things to me. It heals me sometimes and wakes me up, and it gives me something to really focus in ways that, I can't think about anything else because I have to not mess up, making this fit. I love things that require like all of me in an embodied way, right?
Yeah.
I have to use your hands and your eyes and pick it up and move it around. It's refreshing, really refreshing. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to help you.
That'd be amazing.
I have a question. So this morning, while Sebastian and I were getting coffee, we were talking about kind of like post-college, what we want to do. And I want to be a missionary, like Friends Network stuff for a little bit. And Sebastian's dream is to live in Tennessee at some point in his life.
Good choice.
And we were kind
I
of
lived 19 years there, so.
Whoa.
Ooh, I know who to go to for advice.
We were kind of talking about how people in our circles really are interested in just staying close to home. And at one point, we were talking about how important it is to kind of, especially in your 20s, to do something that really scares you and kind of can allow you to destroy your life and then build it back up again and learn about yourself, kind of. And Sebastian said, go get scared. Like, so I'm curious about things that you two did when you were our age that were that, like, that scared you. Or, I mean, I don't, not that many people intentionally dive into that, but I'm curious if.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You got anything offhand?
I jumped out of a perfectly good airplane once.
I did that too.
That was a very terrifying experience in that couple of seconds before the ripcord got pulled. I did a static line, so I didn't have someone doing it for me. So yeah, that was probably one of those like scare yourself moments. What's interesting is that later that night I found out the plane actually did crash.
Guy, I was just going to tell you. Okay, so hold that thought.
Yeah.
I went down a tandem jump.
Okay.
My friends and I did this road trip down to Texas right after high school, and skydiving was on our list. And just before I jumped out with the instructor, I was yelling over the airplane. I said, "Why would I jump out of a perfectly good airplane?" And the other guys, the instructor said, "There is no such thing." Oh, okay. And then we tumble. You know, you see the ground, you see the airplane, you see the ground, you see the airplane's getting smaller.
Yeah, my experience, because it was a static, was different. You had to hold on to the crossbar, and they had like handprints painted where you're supposed to hold. And so you're sitting on the edge. You have to put your hands on the crossbar, and then you have to just step out. And so then you're dangling from the crossbar, and you're looking into the window where the flight instructor is supposed to give you a thumbs up when you're supposed to let go.
Oh, wow.
And so
you're just like hanging on monkey bars?
Yeah, you're hanging on monkey bars. Like, there's nowhere to go at this point.
Feet are dangling?
Your feet are dangling, and so it's like you can't climb back in.
I would have fallen off way before I was supposed to. Like I would have just like,
But so I'm hanging there, and the instructor gives me the thumbs up, and there's probably about a second. It felt like a long time, but it was probably just a second where I'm like, it just kind of froze. I'm like, now? You want me to let go now? And so finally I let go, and it was just like you're tumbling backwards, and you're seeing the plane go, and they tell you that you're supposed to kind of throw your arms and your head back so that you can see that your chute is opening. But they also told you that you don't want the lines to get tangled. So I'm looking back, and what do I see? My lines are tangled. And I'm like, oh no. And fortunately, the air got caught, and it untangled the parachute. But I was like, everything's going wrong. And then I landed safely. But then later that night on the 10 o'clock news, they said, small plane goes down in an Iowa cornfield. And they show a clip, and it's the crossbar with those handprints on it. And I'm like, that was my plane.
You think it was your plane?
It was.
The same day?
It was the same day. And fortunately, they had gone out later with experienced skydivers. So fortunately, there were no major injuries, but the only one who got injured was the pilot. So apparently the engine just stopped.
Gosh.
So everybody jumped out?
Yeah. So they were doing like a night dive. And so most of the people had cleared out, and then suddenly the engine stalled.
Wow.
And so they ended up crashing.
Not only did
That's a story,
Blockbusters
man.
almost do them, but so did skydiving.
I know. Skydiving almost took me out.
Have I ever told the story of how I fell out the Larson Hall window?
No.
Okay, so this is a whistle the feast first. I used to live in Larson Hall, and we were on the second floor.
Which apartment?
I think it was apartment 1.
Okay.
So when you walk in from the parking lot, we're on the left. First door on the left when you walk in. So the story, Derek Lingholm was involved in this story. He was in that apartment. He was a roommate. Back then there were 6 guys, 2 to a bedroom, right? And so Derek was one of them, a familiar name around here, but a bunch of other guys too. And somebody had girls over, didn't know them, didn't know anything about them. And one of the girls was kind. She had probably some code of hospitality or something. She brought bagels and thought it'd be fun for us to eat bagels. Derek thought it was ridiculous, and he was just hyper. You think he's hyper now. He was extra hyper. Did you go to school with him?
No, he went with my sisters.
Yeah.
So he knew my younger sisters. Yeah.
But also a St. Croix guy. So when the girl wasn't looking, everybody's chatting, Derek grabs the bagels and chucks them out the open window. They just go like hurtling out into the night, right? And I saw it happen, and it was sort of a joke, It's like this little prank thing. And a little bit later, the girl who brought the bagels said, "Let's have some bagels. Let's do it." And then she looks around. Where are they? I left them right here. Where are the bagels? And people are chuckling, and I say, I know where they are. I'll go get them for you. Because I believe in chivalry. It's a deep-seated idea for me. So I'm heading for the door. I'm going to go get them, and I don't know. I can't piece together this timeline for this next moment. But somehow, before I get out the door, one of our roommates, Andy Madsen, is holding string and saying to me, "I'll lower you down." Now, since this time, I'm gonna cut in here. Since this time, I've learned that the male mind takes till about 28 for the frontal lobe to really finish cooking. At which time you can assess risk and make good decisions. And we were way before that. Cut back into the story. I shrug and I say, "Sure." And we tie this around my waist, and 5 guys, right? The rest of my roommates are holding on to the other end. And, I called it string. Rope would be generous, right? It's somewhere in between.
Oh.
And now I'm like old Batman TV show style, stepping out of the window and leaning back into the rope, and it's working. And everybody's, yeah, right, it's working. And I'm taking step. My feet are on the siding, right? It's nighttime. Big lit window, and it's going well until the string hits the windowsill, and that becomes a point of tension and snaps.
How high up were you?
Second story. Go look at it sometime.
Wow.
I'll have to.
So what's happening now, like slow-mo, what's happening is I'm falling.
Skydiving.
Yeah, it's another skydiving story. I'm falling, and I hit the ground. It's grass. It's nighttime. I'm looking at the stars. I know that there's, up in that lit window up there, I can hear uproarious laughter. Just hilarious laughter up there. And I'm on the ground looking at the stars, and then right above me, a window cranks open. And the guy in the apartment below sticks his head out, and he says, "What was that?" And he's looking out, and he's looking up, right? I'm right below him. He hasn't seen me yet. And he's talking to the guys in his apartment. "What was it? Did you guys hear that?" I said, "Hey, Eric." And he looks down at me. He says, "Jaspersen, what are you doing? What was that?" All I heard was bump. I said that was my feet on the siding. What are you doing what happened? I said, "I got to get the bagels." By this time, Derek is sticking his head out, just laughing hilariously. "Jaspersen, you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine." Now, I should have died.
Yeah.
Should have broken a leg, an arm. I was fine.
Wow.
Right? I mean, that could have been a broken neck easily.
Oh, yeah.
That could have been like a
Right, because you were
a
going
tragic
down
Bethany
like this,
story.
too.
Yeah.
Like, that's the back of your head. That's like everything.
That's right. Every now and then there's an instance like that where you just know that angels were doing some work there,
Oh yeah.
and it wasn't time yet. That's a classic story.
Yeah. Can't believe I didn't know that.
Well, and it's such a guy thing that they were laughing instead of like
right.
asking, "Are you okay?" first. Like in college, there was an incident where one of my friends, we were playing tennis, and he came across the front of the net, got his foot caught, and just took a nosedive hard. And for a brief second, we actually said, "Are you okay?" And as soon as he said, "Yeah," then we fell to the ground laughing. We were just crying so hard because we just thought it was hilarious. But that is such guy
It's slapstick
behavior.
comedy.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
you know, it's he might have gotten hurt. Well, it looked hilarious.
Right. It's going to be a great story.
Right.
Yeah, that could have been very different.
Yeah.
So that's in response to the dangerous things.
Mm-hmm.
But that was just like
Yeah.
stupid.
But you didn't do that on purpose.
Didn't do that on purpose. One time, I was younger. I tried to kick the top of a door frame in the boys' locker room at MVL.
So
Like
you tried to do like a backflip?
17-year-old me, yes. 17-year-old me thought, yeah, I can do that, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking at it, I can take that. I got it, right? And I try it, and I just like practically land on my head.
Yeah.
You know? Like, and that's concrete. Thank you, God.
Wow.
It's amazing anybody
Good thing we're
survives
all still
childhood.
alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good prompt.
Thank you.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
let's talk about concerts.
Okay. First concert was Stryper with
All right.
Armored Saint opening up. I was 14 at the Orpheum in Minneapolis. They were throwing Bibles out. It was awesome. That was kind of their shtick.
Somehow I want to get us into a 90s nostalgia machine.
Let's see. When I was in grad school, Vanderbilt was one of those bigger universities that could kind of get people who were just on their right on the bubble of breaking out, so they hadn't quite hit the mainstream. And so Vanderbilt brought Smashing Pumpkins during their first album, Siamese Dream.
Yes.
And then Alanis Morissette, shortly after Jagged Little Pill, she
Isn't it?
performed at Vanderbilt and Living Color. And so I got to see quite a few of those 90s kind of acts.
You were going to Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, of course, Nashville is known as Music City. So then I was also going to lots of little dives and stuff like that. Got to see the Wooten brothers, if you know anything about like music. Victor Wooten is like a musician's musician on, I think it's the bass. And he had like 6 brothers, all almost as musically talented as he was. And they would perform at this little dive place called Third and Lindsley every Wednesday. And oftentimes there'd, be a line, and especially because periodically Victor Wooten would sit in with them. And somehow this was pre-internet, pre-social media, but somehow the word would get out, and all of a sudden the line was like around 3 blocks, people trying to get in. And so those were some of the fun things. And they had this summer concert series called Dancing in the District down on the riverfront. And so like they brought in cake during their period of the distance and all that. Oh, it was awesome.
That's a group.
Yeah.
That's music.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was cake.
Yeah. Got to clarify.
Yes.
I want to show you my phone. Because this was funny at supper the other day.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
You know what that is.
Oh, yeah. 3.5 floppy.
Is that a floppy disk?
Yep.
That is a floppy
3.5
disk.
inch
Not
floppy
everybody knew
disk.
what that was.
Yep.
The best guess was garage door.
Ooh, I could see that.
It was me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any brushes with a celebrity in any of those?
Oh, yeah. I went to go see Hank Williams III.
Ooh, I know that one.
A friend of mine had a friend who was somehow in the music industry. He was a grad student, but he had some connection. And so Hank Williams III was having a CD release party for his very first album, and it was going to be at a honky tonk downtown. And so we got in and we were listening to it. And at that same time, Kid Rock was doing a collaboration with his dad, Hank Williams Jr. And so he was in town.
Wait, Kid Rock's dad?
No, Hank Williams. Hank Williams III. Hank Williams Jr. This was mid '90s or so forth, and so I think Hank Williams Jr. did like a bunch of collabs, like a collab album, and one of the collabs was with Kid Rock. And so I'm here at this honky tonk, and we're enjoying the music, and I start heading back to the bathroom. And who should I see but Kid Rock? So Kid Rock had come to the CD release party for Hank Williams III. And I'm walking by him, and he's got these bodyguards and these escorts. And in the back, because a lot of the honky tonks are like shotgun houses, like in New Orleans, where it's just kind of straight thing. And so you can see the alley, and you can see the limo parked in the alley for Kid Rock. But I'm walking right by him, and I almost said something to the effect of, "I want to be a cowboy, baby." But I knew he had a reputation as being a hothead, and I really didn't want to get punched out by either him or his bodyguard. So I just kind of walked right by him and then walked back as well. But that's one brush with fame, was seeing Kid Rock at a honky tonk.
He was a big deal by then?
Oh, yeah. This was like mid-'90s. It was after his first big album. And so, yeah, he was a big deal at that time. I also saw Vince Gill at a Nashville Predators game. He was a big hockey fan. So those are a couple examples.
You wear your Living Color T-shirt once a year to school.
Yes, usually. Actually, not just the Living Color T-shirt. I have a number of rock T-shirts that I'll wear during a finals week.
Is it the same lineup every year?
It's a lot of the same ones.
Or you have a palette to select from?
I used to have a larger palette when I was younger. Now I'm probably down to just 3 rock T-shirts.
Sure.
I've got 2 Living Color T-shirts. One is Nothing More, and then that might actually be it. I used to have. Oh, and I have a Striper. I have a Striper T-shirt.
Yeah, these things don't last forever.
No, they don't.
So while we were talking at lunch about the dawn of Spotify and how baffling that was,
and I'm still not on Spotify. I'm still using Pandora, so I haven't even made.
That's right.
So I haven't even like made the transition. Yeah, right? Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I just think it's interesting for our listeners to hear this. Napster came up. Brian Klebig was talking about Napster and how he still kind of has this sort of logic in his brain that anything pirated or downloaded is shrug. It's probably fine.
Yeah. I had roommates in Nashville who were really big into Napster, and all of those, what do they call, rip sites? They would rip movies. They would rip TV shows.
Torrent was one of them.
Yes. Yep. That was it.
Yeah. So you had to buy your music, and then this thing came about called the internet, where like information could travel from computer to computer, and then it didn't take long for somebody to figure out how to get files available, and then it was this huge controversy. Napster was, always in court, and Metallica sued him. And then Spotify, or Pandora first, and then Spotify, it becomes this sort of, it's just, you can just have it.
Right. You just stream it.
And you can find anything. It's all there. This felt like a miracle when it happened.
Yeah,
to me.
It's impressive, because there's lots of songs that I'll hear even on the MySpace of music, Pandora, that it would take thousands of dollars to have the library of CDs in order to be able to get the diversity of songs that you listen to.
Yeah. Now, but an interesting thought is we've slowly eased into a subscription culture. So now you pay for access, and if you stop paying, it's all gone.
Yeah.
You have nothing.
I know.
You don't own anything.
Yeah, and that's why I've started to buy up a bunch of DVDs because for movies, for the same reason, because the same thing is true of streaming. And I haven't seen it on like Pandora, and I don't think it's happened on Spotify, but with streaming services, movies disappear.
Yeah, they cycle
TV
out.
shows disappear. TV episodes of shows disappear. There's an infamous episode of Community that some of the streaming services refuse to show. And so if you don't have the DVD of that season,
Because it's taboo today?
yeah, it's taboo today. And it got banned shortly after the summer of 2020, when we were kind of having a lot of discussion about race and so forth. And I don't know how familiar you are with the show Community.
No, I haven't been there.
It's a show about these students at a community college, and it is very meta. There are lots of references to larger kind of pop culture. They had a whole episode that was nothing but action movie tropes, and it was all centered around a paint gun war on campus. Just an excellent episode. Like if you've watched Point Break and Die Hard and all of those action movies, you totally get the references that they are talking about. And they had another paintball episode, which was all about Western tropes. So the man with no name, the good, bad, and the ugly, and so forth. So, but they had one episode that was about Dungeons and Dragons. And the reason it got banned was because one of the characters dressed as a dark elf, and they thought that was blackface. And so as a result, you cannot watch that episode on most of the streaming services. So it'll jump from episode 21 to 23, and episode 22 is just
It's
gone.
a banned book.
Yeah, basically, yeah. But that's the thing that kind of concerned me, was that how easy it would be to just basically make certain pieces of art disappear.
So now you're back at Blockbuster.
Yeah, exactly. Start buying up those VHSs. Yep.
I'm interested in what you would recommend, given the access that students have now. Let's say music.
Mm-hmm.
Spotify is almost entirely searchable. Neil Young came back.
Yeah.
He's there again. And let's stay in the 90s. What's back there that's worth digging out, going to find?
Well, I will say that Jars of Clay. I'm a big fan of Jars of Clay.
That used to be a really familiar name.
Yeah. The first album, of course, is excellent, but I think their subsequent albums are underrated.
If I Can't Swim After 40 Days.
Yeah, yep. But their second album, Much Afraid, I think is an excellent album too. And then Good Monsters, which actually I think came out in 2000. So
That's an album title?
Yeah. And so Good Monsters, Who We Are Instead, I think is the name of the album before that. So they have about 3 or 4 albums spanning from their self-titled debut through to early 2000 that I think are excellent. So that would be one of my recommendations, is Jars of Clay.
So you're saying specific albums because some albums are not excellent?
I would say that there's one album, I think it's called If I Left the Zoo. Not a big fan of. It's not that it's probably not good, but compared to the others, it's not one of my favorites. So that's why I've been mentioning the others, because the others I really, really like.
We've talked about King's X.
Oh, yeah. See, they're technically started in the 80s, but I would absolutely recommend King's X too. I would recommend especially their first 4 albums. They went through a crisis of faith, and that became difficult as a listener who loved their early works. Yeah. And I'm trying to think if there are other artists like that, where they started off as faithful believers, and at some point in their musical career, they left the faith. Gungor comes to mind. Okay. And it just changes the whole way you perceive their music. And even the early stuff now gets kind of tainted by the knowledge of where they are now. And so listening to King's X is kind of a bittersweet experience.
Can you name those albums? Give our listeners search terms.
Out of the Silent Planet is their first one. Gretchen Goes to Nebraska is their second one. The third one is, I think, just self-titled, King's X. The fourth one is, let's see, it's the fourth one. Oh, fourth one is Faith, Hope, Love.
Yeah,
Faith, Hope, Love. And then Dogman. Yeah. And it's at, and
I'm
it's,
just excited.
and it's at Dogman that I would say that's where the transition happens.
Yeah, it starts to
because then the next one is Ear Candy, and there, Doug Pinnick, the lead singer, has some really explicit, not in terms of like bad language, but explicit language about, I guess I lost my faith. And so it's kind of from that album on that King's X is kind of a different band for me.
King's X was often heard out that window that I fell.
Yeah.
So was Weezer. It was kind of Weezer's heyday.
Yep, that totally makes sense too. Yep. So yeah, King's X, Jars of Clay, if you're talking kind of 90s bands that I really like. Let's see, who else would make the list? Well, Living Color. Everyone only remembers their first album, which is a crime. Their second album, Time's Up, is actually a better album than the first one. And the first one is solid. Like from start to finish, it's a solid album. But Time's Up, I think, is even a better album. Their third album is Stain. And there they went kind of industrial. It's kind of a really different sound. Like if you were into like, was it Ministry and kind of the harder 9 Inch Nails, that's kind of the sound of that third album, Stain. And then they released what I call the 9/11 album right after 9/11. It is called, oh shoot, now I'm not remembering it. But a Kaleidoscope, or Kaleidoscope, I think is what it's called. And they have one track in particular that I often play whenever it's September 11th in my classes, because I like to play pre-class music, and it's called Flying. And it is probably the most haunting song because it's written from the perspective of the people who were having to jump out the window of the World Trade Center. It's just a devastating song. And the thing is that it is couched with a really kind of beautiful, like kind of guitar, kind of jangly song. So if you don't listen to the lyrics, you would have no idea just how dark and heartbreaking it is. And
that contrast has got to be on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you discover new music?
I do. I thankfully, Pandora still sometimes will put me in touch with newer music and so forth. It's not as good, I know, as Spotify at kind of like pushing new music your way and so forth.
Sometimes it's freaky the way Spotify can do it, though. So Pandora's good. It's like you're actually doing the searching yourself.
Yeah, well, and Pandora, what I've learned is that's kind of like the comfort food streaming service, because it'll keep playing a lot of the stuff that you've liked, and it will find stuff that's similar. Whereas my understanding is Spotify is more exploratory. It will put more different and new stuff kind of in your ears, whereas Pandora does less of that. But for instance, Andy Grammer is an artist that
Sebastian went to Andy Grammer's concert.
I did too. I went to the one down on the riverfront, and it was all because Pandora put Andy Grammer in my ear. And so I suddenly discovered Andy Grammer's music, and I didn't realize that he had been around for 10 years. I was like, he had a couple top 40 hits, and I was like, oh, I had no idea this was a guy, because the song that captured my attention was 85.
I love that one.
It's such a good song, and I always play it when I'm covering developmental psychology, especially end of life stuff, because the chorus is, I don't want to be 85, saying, oh no, I missed it, I was chasing money. I mean, it's just a beautiful song about where your priorities should be.
That's what the woodworker Sebastian said.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Andy Grammer's a new one. I discovered a hard rock band, Nothing More. So they're kind of a relatively new group. I think they put out their self-titled album 2014 or something like that. So, and they have a great song that it's like, Do You Really Want It? And the chorus is something like, everybody wants to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves. And I'm like, that's the human condition.
That's
right
Lutheran
there.
theology right there.
Yeah, that's the human condition in a nutshell.
That's the evangelical thing.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, these guys are kind of like former Christians, which is kind of the heartbreaking part. But you can still feel in those first two albums kind of some of their Christian upbringing kind of taking hold. Yeah, still exerting some influence.
A cool thing about Dr. Stadler's music is he actually plays it before class, like he said, but he always finds songs that are related to what we cover in the class that day. So not only do you get to walk in and get to jam to some fire music, it's also relevant to what we're about to learn about, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, that relevancy makes me curious. I would expect you make playlists.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, so does Sebastian. Sebastian is I want to hear about your playlist making process and if it exists, or like, is it a bunch of songs that you stumble across and you decide to throw them together? Or is it like this song embodies a specific feeling and I want a bunch of them together that also embody that same feeling? Or
it originated with, here's the topic for today. What songs can I think of that are connected to the topic? And that's basically how the playlist got built. So that for Gen Psych, for instance, the week I'm covering biological psychology, I'm using songs like If I Only Had a Brain from The Wizard of Oz. I'm using Lost in My Head by The Head and the Heart, and Electricity by Goodness for the neuron and electrical communication. So I originally started, and I continue, that's kind of how I build my playlist, is like, what's the topic? What's a relevant song to illustrate that topic?
Is there just one song per day?
There is when I don't have the time. So for instance, unfortunately, my Gen Psych class is sandwiched between two other classes in the classroom. So I only get time. Like if I don't have a class before me, I'll come in 15 minutes beforehand and I'll have 3 or 4 songs that I'll be playing while I'm setting up and so forth. But if I'm constrained by there's another class before me, then I usually get one song in before.
So
class.
is this your Pandora account that it's playing?
No. I'm usually using YouTube. I mean, like I'm really like the epitome of like a Gen X not knowing what they're doing.
No,
but
YouTube has everything.
Yeah. So I'll find the YouTube. I'll queue it up, and so then when I'm ready to play, then I just put it over the speakers.
Ever a music video there?
Oh, well, they're all being played music video, but I don't show it.
Okay.
So they come in and all they hear is the music. There have been times when I've considered maybe having like a lyric video so they can see the lyrics and see it. But I'm doing so many other things on the screen that I don't want them to see. So, like taking attendance.
By ads pop up.
Oh yeah. Not during the song, but yeah, a lot of times I'll click on the video and there'll be an ad. So then I mute until I get to the point where I can skip, and then I play the song.
I used to play in the MVL art studio. We'd play a Spotify account, but it wasn't a paid account, so ads would come up, and like there were several months at a time where it's obvious that there was like a whiskey campaign happening.
Oh,
sorry, kids, don't tell your parents.
Okay, outside of class playlist, like personal use playlist, are you a big playlist maker? Or
no, because again, I'm using a free account on Pandora, so I have stations, but I don't have a playlist. So I have a King's X station, I have a Living Color station, I have a Jars of Clay station, I have a Nothing More station, then I have kind of like my pop music station, which plays everything from like old Michael Jackson to Bare Naked Ladies and kind of everything in between.
That was a band.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a good band.
Really?
Yeah.
It is a good band.
Yeah. The other thing that Pandora did was it put me in touch with some of their newer music. Like my CD collection stops at Stunt, which is like 2003. And they've been producing all sorts of songs since then. And there are a couple songs in particular that I've really grown to love. Odds Are is one of my favorite newer songs by them. And I use that anytime I talk about statistics. So
how about They Might Be Giants?
I never got into them. I like them musically, and I like the fact I can appreciate how gifted they are musically. I do use Istanbul, and I use Dinner Bell. I use Dinner Bell too. So I do use two.
Is that Pavlovian?
Yes. Yeah, anytime I cover Pavlov, you're going to hear Dinner Bell by They Might Be Giants.
Okay. That might be a one for you to explore, Feast Reader, but you have to understand that listening to one song is not sufficient. To understand them,
You have to listen to their whole kind of...
yeah, you have to listen to a lot. But their songs are usually between 30 seconds and a minute.
Yeah. There was one song, I'm trying to remember. There's this YouTube guy who I love, Rick Beato, and he has created so much appreciation about music. And so he'll talk about like songs that are in the craziest time, meters and so forth. And he was talking about a particular song by They Might Be Giants, which he said is one of the most intricate pop songs you will ever come across. And it's because they're constantly changing their time, the time meter, and they're changing their the chord progression or whatever. They're going from like A minor to G major to D seventh, and there's like, it's just crazy what they're doing in this 3-minute song.
Yeah.
And so coming across him has made me appreciate, it's like, oh, I should probably give some of these artists a chance, because this guy thinks that they're really musically gifted.
Oh, people like what they like.
Yeah.
Personally, I can't get over Beck. I love
Oh, really?
Beck.
I never got into it, and I think it's because I was never a big fan of Loser. And that
This
just kind of
exact conversation happened with Brian Klevig at lunch.
Okay, that's
that
too
was
funny.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's unfortunate
line.
that was his first song, because I appreciate like Where It's At. I do enjoy anytime Where It's At comes on.
Yeah.
If that had been the first song that I'd heard of Beck, I probably would have given him more of a chance.
Yeah.
But that Loser song, just, I don't know, for whatever reason.
People talk about it like it was going to be a one-hit wonder kind of thing.
Yeah, and he wasn't. I mean, like, I do have one of his albums. It's the one that you could make your own cover art, because it included...
Oh, with stickers.
Yes, with stickers. Yeah, I have
the
that
information.
Yes. And there are a couple of tracks on there that I absolutely love.
Yeah.
Nausea
Yes.
and so forth. So I do have one of his albums, but
Man, I get so excited just thinking about Beck.
but that stupid Loser song just kind of, and it's so funny. Yeah, it's so funny how sometimes artists that happens, where to give a different example of kind of the opposite. Joan Osborne, remember she had this song "One of Us." What if God was one of us? Great song, loved it. Bought her album. The rest of the album is nothing like that song.
Yeah.
She's way more like jazzy and soulful. That and I bought subsequent albums, and that was her style. The One of Us was kind of a one-off song. And what's interesting, it was written by someone else. I don't know if you remember the band from the 80s, the Hooters.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so that lead singer was the guy who wrote the song for her. And so it totally makes sense, because that song is much more in line with the Hooters music than it was with the rest of her album.
That reminds me of Extreme's big hit, More Than Words.
Yes, which is, again, not indicative of their discography.
Right.
Because I love Extreme. I actually saw them on my sabbatical with Living Color. So Living Color was opening for Extreme. It was awesome. And that was after they had released their album 6, which is a banger.
I do love that song, though, More Than Words.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good song, but again, it's one of these things where it completely colored everyone's understanding of who they were as a band.
Yeah.
And that was unfortunate.
Okay, that was fun.
Yeah.
Recommendations, and also just like so this is an interesting phenomenon. Let's step away from the details of it. Isn't it true that as you get older, it's harder to find anybody that you can have that conversation with?
Which conversation about music?
About music that you remember from high school or college.
Maybe. I mean, I think that I think with people in your cohort, it's not a problem.
But I mean, like in my daily life, when I go to work, when I'm here, Andy Overn is blah 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 years older than me, and Ben Lunston is blah blah years younger than me. By decades.
Right.
So these are dear friends, but like we had a different experience.
Yeah.
It's just like when you're in college or when you're in school, it's automatic. Everybody
Right. Because everyone's,
is together.
Yeah. Well, that raises a really interesting question, or a really interesting thing I learned recently, which was a thesis that the Gen Z generation will be the first generation that doesn't have any collective memory of pop culture that came before them. So, and
like we saw syndicated TV.
Right. Like, for instance, in social psych, I am planning at some point to show them episodes of The Twilight Zone, the original. I am curious how many of the students in the class have ever seen an episode of that show, because thanks to streaming, there's just so much new content. Whereas for Gen Xers and millennials, we were still kind of part of the cable generation, where you had cable TV. And
I was pre-cable. I mean, like not pre, but we just didn't afford it.
Well, but what I'm saying is that they had to fill up all that time, so they were putting on a lot of stuff that predated us. And so, for instance, Sci-Fi always had the New Year's Twilight Zone marathon.
Sure.
And a lot of these stations would have a lot of those older shows. And even when
I watched Star Trek from the 60s.
Yeah.
When I was a kid in the 80s.
Right, exactly. I was watching, I'm trying to think of some of the, Gilligan's Island.
Yeah,
and all those things predated me.
Heroes.
Yeah, all that stuff predated me. But because they were in syndication and so forth, we still had kind of a collective pop knowledge of what had come before us.
Because we were desperate.
Well, yeah, there wasn't many options.
Something.
Yeah. Well, there wasn't options, whereas now, because streaming keeps putting out so much new content, it's nearly impossible to keep up with new content, much less get exposed.
And that's
to
assuming
older
that
content.
you're even watching that stuff.
Right.
You might just be watching a gamer streaming or something.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, streaming has, I would say, fractured pop culture. I don't know that there is anymore a singular thing called pop culture among Gen Zers.
People call it the monoculture. The monoculture doesn't exist.
Right. And what's disheartening is, up until 2015, I used to teach a psychology of pop culture class. And at some point, probably around 2022, I realized I don't think I can teach this class anymore, because there isn't a monoculture that my examples the students would recognize, like as a class. Like maybe one would, but I was very depressed.
Or it's hiding. Sometimes I wonder about memes. Yeah. I wonder if memes are this kind of underground version.
Yeah, that might be true. I mean, so maybe that, but even there, I don't know. Like, I don't always understand all the memes that happen, and I don't even. But I don't even catch all the memes.
Correct.
And that again speaks to perhaps a fracturing of pop culture, such that, I mean, what would be the last cultural moment that was shared by a majority of Americans?
I've been thinking about this.
Someone suggested Game of Thrones.
I suggest COVID.
Well, yeah, but I'm thinking about, like, in terms of popular media and so forth.
It'd be Avengers.
Avengers Endgame might have been the last.
Everybody had to go
moment.
See that.
Yeah, that might have been the last cultural big moment.
I didn't watch Game of Thrones. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't watch Game of Thrones either. But Avengers.
But everyone knew about it.
No.
But everyone knew what Game of Thrones was, even if you didn't see it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what suggests the monoculture, is even if you didn't watch stuff, you knew about it, you knew kind of what it was, and so forth.
We knew that the Oscars were a big deal. We knew that the Super Bowl was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure that that's obvious anymore.
Yeah.
I'm confused. So the claim, what did you said Gen Z will be the last generation that...
So the claim is that the millennials, especially the older millennials,
right,
may be the last generation that has kind of a collective memory of media that predates them. So that, for instance, they are familiar with shows from the 80s, even though they weren't born until the early 90s, and so forth. Just like I was familiar with shows from the 50s and 60s.
So you're saying, like, we are only familiar with what's right here?
Kind of. That's the thesis.
Because it's so, like, saturated?
Yes,
like,
because there's so much saturation.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's so much saturation of so much content. Like, for instance, I forget exactly what the stat was, but it was something like in 1994, there were 72 new scripted shows. Now there's something like 635.
Wow.
Scripted shows.
Well, yeah, I was telling a friend recently, I was like, I want a video of every single trend from 2016 until now. And they were like, it would be like 14 days long. I was like, no, you're right. So it is interesting that like our accessibility to consume is just so huge, and like to get to something that predates us, you have to like swim forever and you're not going to touch it. I mean, like, I grew up watching Bonanza and Gilligan's Island and, like, Wagon Train and all of the old stuff that my mom liked, like My Three Sons and Leave It to Beaver, Brady Bunch. Like, because we were a strictly DVD family. We got rid of cable when I was, like, 3. And so a lot of my consumption of media was DVDs and the old shows, like Bewitched and... It's like a lot of the gold, and like in a storyline in which there's like 5 different things happening and not just one. Like, you ever watch a new show? They're terrible.
Yeah, but that's countercultural,
right?
I mean,
you're right.
Your family was countercultural to the time.
It's true.
Speaking of on how you said with like new shows are terrible,
MASH.
Ooh, my dad loved MASH. One of my roommates recently was watching a YouTube video about Stranger Things and how they actually had, for some of them, supposedly, had a different script, and Netflix made them change it because they didn't think people would be able to keep up with it unless they made it more obvious. And like
I've been hearing about that.
Yeah,
Matt Damon's been talking about how you have to restate the story over and over because you assume that somebody's on their phone and they miss it.
I think that was the one where it's like they just assume people are on their phones not paying attention, so they have to make it so obvious.
Have you guys ever watched Goodbye, Mr. Chips?
No, but I recognize that, yeah.
Well, I was explaining it to a friend recently because we watched it a couple weeks ago, and so much happens in that plot in that hour and a half, 2 hours or whatever, and when you're telling it to someone, you're like, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this, they're like, how long is this movie? And it's interesting that, like, the plot of something that was created back then can be that deep with like things, and like it just keeps moving. And I think, are you guys familiar with the term enshittification?
I think I can.
I'm sorry, it's what it's called.
I vaguely recall hearing that term, but I don't remember exactly what it means.
Leah was telling me all about it. She's reading a book, and it's just called enshittification.
Yeah.
Okay, it's essentially that we've gotten to this climax of like, we have everything accessible, but once it's to that peak, the people who are making the money can start charging more and charging more. And so, like, in the context of Spotify, it starts costing more to have a subscription, and then it costs more, and it costs more, and it costs more. And because they're convincing you that they're the best. You know, they've already convinced their entire platform that, like, this is where you get your music. Same with every streaming service or whatever, or, like, a publishing house. There used to be, like, 4 or 5... whatever, big publishing houses, and now there's like 2 or 3 because of, in like the way that the AI has, never mind, I'm not going to get into that, but just the concept of like, you get told that this is the best way to do it, and then that best way becomes more expensive and less affordable for the consumer, and then the consumer is kind of the one with power, but they don't really know it, and then everything kind of sucks, and you're like, why am I paying $20 for my Spotify subscription?
Because it's a good business model.
Oh, business guy comes in.
I know, but I mean, like, we talk a lot about ethics in class because they are so important, and I feel like it's maybe relevant in that sense of, like, to make a lot of money, it's super easy to make a lot of money if you just decide not to be ethical and not to care about the consumer.
It's true.
Just, like you're saying, once you convince the consumer you need their product and make it seem like they can't live without it, you can charge however much money you want. And they'll just keep doing it because they feel as if they need it.
Is that the commodification of psychology?
It might be. I don't
Could be, yeah. I know that the APA has had a lot of statements about the misuse of psychology. First, it was in
what's
the early...
What's APA?
The American Psychological Association. So the APA came out shortly after the war in Iraq started in 2004, 2005, against psychologists using their field to, for instance, help the military develop enhanced interrogation, aka torture. So they were arguing that that was a misuse of psychology. Now they are looking at the misuse of psychology to develop persuasive technology, such as keeping you on your phone scrolling. Psychologists have used what we know about persuasion and what we know about consumer psychology to develop very addictive technology. And so, for instance, it was probably psychologists who told Facebook to get rid of the end of the scroll. You know, there was a time early in Facebook where you would get to the end of your feed and you're like, oh, okay, I guess that's all there is.
Dude.
And so you would be able to get off. And now there's the endless scroll.
Well, there's such a huge market for distraction because that's how you keep people, like content. And that's the whole thing, is that the more you limit everyone's attention span, the more you can just keep feeding dumbness, I guess. It's like, what are we,
Well, and then the like button, for instance, that gives you a dopamine hit when people like your, post or so forth. So there's all this use of psychology to make a lot of the technology what they call persuasive.
So this is axiology.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting back to axiology about what's right and wrong.
And maybe the teleology of the business model.
Yeah, or the field. What's the purpose of psychology? Is the purpose of psychology to simply make businesses run more effectively, or should we be concerned with human flourishing instead?
Yeah. Thus woodworking.
That's woodworking.
Right? You don't, like the way that we're talking about it, we're not talking about woodworking as a production sort of thing to do in order to make money or have a transaction. It's for human flourishing. And in that case, I recommend hand tools. Because it's harder and slower and quieter. And these things are good for the human. Interesting. That's a different teleology. The purpose.
Yep.
Telos.
As contemplative Christians, what are you guys thinking about lately?
Awesome.
Good. Something I think about is just, for context, in Intro to Fiction, we are going over short stories right now. And they've been very interesting. Reading fiction is wonderful because, as Angie Johnson says, it's the lie that tells the truth. And the explanation of that is that it's a way for us to approach different things to talk about, like political, socioeconomic, that kind of stuff, in a way that's less intimidating. Like, you can't walk up to somebody and be like, let's talk about, like, politics specifically. I don't want to, like, say a specific thing, but if you write it in a fiction short story where your mindset can be like, this isn't real, it opens up a doorway to discuss it with people, is kind of like the sense of that. And our second semester project for this, second end of semester project for this class is we write our own short stories. And I've been trying to brainstorm ideas of like what I want to write about. And I was writing them down, and I've got into religion, like Christianity, social roles, and the whole like being simultaneously saints and sinners, and how we constantly live in this tug of war of the world is pulling us and dragging us and trying to addict us to consumerism, to scrolling on the phone, to buy, get your dopamine now, that kind of stuff. And then God is not pulling, but calling us to him and his perfect design and his love that he has for us, and how we constantly live in this state of being pulled by the world, of where we live in this world but we're not of this world, and navigating that, and how that can be very difficult at times, of being a resident of this world but being God's child, and how you approach worldly issues with the mindset of being God's child. I don't know, that was like a lot of words, but does that make sense?
Look what you did, Claire. You did it. We got some Sebastian out of this.
And so, yeah, just trying to navigate that and wade through that, of like, when there are these worldly issues that it gets asked of you to have an opinion or to make an impact of like, how do you treat that, knowing you have this godly lens, but also with all the influences that are constantly poured on you day by day by the world.
See, it will be your turn to build the bridges not long, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're just further along the path, and people are born into the time they're born into and trained and equipped in the ways that God trains and equips people. And I think every generation sort of wonders if the kids will be okay and if the world will be okay. And part of the reason I like doing Whistle the Feast is to reveal that God's got it. And these people of every age are pretty amazing, pretty astounding. And God works through means. He works through us. So I'm encouraged by the way you are. Does your question continue?
Yeah, well, I mean...
Or she wants our answers.
It's for everyone's turn, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So
Who wants to go next?
Say it again.
Said, what are you contemplative Christians thinking about spending mind space on?
You got anything here?
Where do I start? I am struggling with anger at the world. And I think that's one of the things that I'm currently contemplating is how to have the mind and heart of Christ when every fiber of my being wants to tear down and destroy those I think are the evildoers and the unjust. So I have a very strong justice impulse. I've always had it. And so it's very easy for me to get into this destroy all who, are unjust. And I know that's not the mind of Christ and the heart of Christ. And so that's one of the things I am continually wrestling with and contemplating is how can I still be against that which is wrong without wanting to destroy the people who are doing wrong? Because we're supposed to love our neighbors, and that includes our enemies. And we are not supposed to be the ones making enemies, but we may have enemies because of the fact that we are of Christ. And so that's one of the struggles, one of the things that I'm constantly wrestling with, especially with the constant news cycles that can cause one to despair that there is justice in the world. So that would be one of the many things that I contemplate and wrestle with.
It does feel like the world is shifting. To me, it feels like there's a historical fulcrum on the horizon. And
I hope I'm wrong, but over the last several months, I've wondered, at what point did the people of Rome know that Rome was going to fall?
Right.
And that's how it feels at times. Is like, am I witnessing the new fall of Rome, and we just aren't picking up on it, or the momentum has gotten to the point where the train is rolling down the hill and there's no stopping it. And so that's what then causes the kind of like more negative feelings and so forth. Is like, and I think part of it is like, I hate for the fact that my kids and my students and others may be having to live through this period,
Yeah, but that's what I was just saying about Sebastian, like it's a precarious time to look ahead, but maybe it always has been. And historically, you study history, and there's always these giant shifts that becomes, just a little footnote to us, but it was like centuries of shifting and changing and lifetimes. and completely all engrossing and all encompassing at the time. Happens all the time.
Yeah.
You know, we're constantly surprised as humans.
And as you pointed out, I mean, God is with us regardless.
Yeah.
He helped the Christians weather the fall of Rome. He helped Christians weather the Black Plague. I mean, through the millennia, God has helped his church and his believers weather traumatic, terrible epochs. So,
and there can be very surprising things that come. I saw a prediction that the gospel, the underground gospel, is really on the move in Iran and China. Imagine that outcome. If you know, we've heard about Luther's idea of the passing rain shower of the gospel making its way around the world, and you know, it kind of left Europe and came across to America, and you wonder, where's it going now? Well, that would be a surprise.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. If the rain is now falling in the Middle East.
God does surprising things. That's his brand.
Yep.
I want to work on answering this question.
I don't want to know what you've been thinking about, because I feel like your thoughts are always primed to be... I want to know what you're afraid of in this moment.
Did you just change?
Your answer is different. Their answer can stay the same.
What am I afraid of?
Because the other day you told me there's a war coming.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I'm not afraid of the fall of the Roman Empire. I'm afraid of the Rubicon. I'm afraid of the fall of the Republic and the beginning of the Empire. The Roman Republic lasted for, I believe, 400 years prior to Caesar. And then it all changed.
Yeah.
And that's a bloody exchange. The paradigm is not pretty.
Well,
that's my answer.
Okay,
I'm afraid of
that's
that.
good.
well, and to follow up on that, when I was in high school, our high school history teacher said the average length of any empire is 200 years. Now, I have not been able to find where he gets that figure from, but that has always stuck in my mind. We are about to celebrate our 250th year, which means we are running on borrowed time based on history.
Sure, the averages.
If the average is 200, we have exceeded the average already. And Rome is the extreme outlier. But other empires that seem to be unassailable lasted 70 years or 80 years. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, and so forth. And so
The sun does set on the English Empire.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So kind of similar to your fear about the Rubicon, I'm kind of thinking that maybe the American experiment has passed its expiration date, and how that ends, that's kind of the live question, whether it ends in kind of a Caesar who then takes over, or whether it ends with another country taking over.
Yeah, and these things would be absolutely surprising to us, but not absolutely surprising in history.
Right.
I find it interesting the way that it feels like the weight of the things that's falling on you guys, like Sebastian's How to Be God's Child in This World, and your like anger at the world, and your like fear of what's next precipice thing, like that disparity feels like it falls heavily on men. And like I'm afraid of things, but I've been noticing the way that for a long part of my life I connected to that phrase of like, I'm a lover, not a fighter, and I always I didn't connect. I always thought the person who claims to be a lover, not a fighter, is weak. You know, you're a fighter, you're building your skin. Like, I always kind of had that tough kid mentality, I guess, and I've been noticing that lately I'm just trying to figure out how to be a lover, not a fighter. Like, I want soft hands, I don't want calloused hands. And it's interesting. We're doing Mary Poppins right now, and there's a line in which the kids are complaining about their dad. And Mary says, well, what do the fathers do when no one's there for them? And I've been toying with the idea that the father informs the children's belief on God, but who is there for the man? Like,
you and I talked about this. I want to make sure that this gets clear.
Said correctly.
Informs. Can you rephrase? Informs.
Maybe
father informs.
The father informs the relationship that kids have with the supernatural. Like the first relationship you have with the first man who's supposed to love and choose you teaches you how to be loved and chosen.
Are you saying that it's not something that he says, it's just the child sees God in him?
Yes.
He's like the model, I think.
Yeah.
He's like the
almost
living
the
model.
first, almost the first God or lowercase g that a kid can experience. So I guess that just sounds heavy to me, and I don't know.
What's
like
it
obviously,
like?
yeah,
What's
and
it
like
like being that?
Yeah, like you guys are dads, and like you're a future dad.
Lord willing.
I don't know what anyone else thinks, but it does feel like a heavy burden. And as someone who is all too aware of my own sin and failures, I feel often like I'm not doing the role justice. And there's constantly, because I do feel, I think, that responsibility. And unfortunately, even worse, I know the social science research that talks about how important the father is to all sorts of outcomes for the kids. That like romantic relationships later in life are affected by the absence or presence of a father in the home, for both males and females, for both boys and girls. And there's all sorts of indicators of the importance of the father in the home for the children and so forth. And so that can be a really heavy burden when you know all that.
Yeah, and a lot of the religious stats too are like if you have a dad bringing you to church, it's a lot more likely that the kids will continue to go to church. Like I've always hated those stats because I don't have a dad, so it's like.
Yeah, and where I previously taught, it was heavily single parent home college students and so forth. And so, yeah, when I started learning those stats, there was a sense of like, oh, I hurt for these students, because I realize maybe the best way of saying it is it kind of puts them at a slight disadvantage. So it's not a disadvantage you can't overcome. There were plenty of these students who were still faithful Christians and so forth, but it's kind of like the deck is stacked against you a little bit. And so it just means you have to work harder, or there have to be other advantages that help to counteract this potential negative impact.
I think it's heavy, but it's a wild thing to recognize that God did that. It's that thing where he works through means again, means of grace, and he puts the gospel. Donnie Molstead likes to talk about, like a little preacher like me, is God's choice to put this into your ears. I remember learning about how somebody might have a problem with who's handing them communion because they know too much about them, right? But that's not what it is. It's not the credibility of the courier,
right?
God's got a design, and he chooses to use broken, weak, sinful people. That's a choice. That's a very interesting choice that baffles us. The gospel is so upside down all the time. God continues to surprise.
Well, like the namesake jars of clay. I mean, that comes from the passage that says we hold these truths in jars of clay so that we can see that the power is from God and not from us. That he uses all of us cracked, broken vessels to impart his grace to a world that desperately needs it. And one of the things that I probably need to remind myself is that God's grace is sufficient for me when I'm feeling absolutely like I'm messing this up as a dad, as a professor, as fill in the blank. So,
yeah, and you know, Claire, if those stats don't speak in your favor, you know, well, God sees you and prepares you in specific ways. We talked tonight earlier about how you're probably being equipped for something really special through all of that. You know, I mean, this isn't, your life isn't roulette.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't end up at Blockbuster.
Right.
Because I didn't die falling out of that window. Right? Because things don't always make sense to us.
Yep.
Yeah, sometimes they can just be a gift.
They can
In the
just
words
be
of
a
Nora.
gift.
There doesn't have to be meaning.
And there was an image that I was taught years ago that I think also sometimes helps me when things seem like chaos and that random and so forth. The image is of a mother doing stitch work, and her child is below her on the floor looking up. And if you've ever seen the back of stitch work, it's hard to see a pattern. It's hard to see that there's anything meaningful happening. But the mother knows what the pattern is and knows what the goal is and knows what she's doing in putting the stitch work pattern together. And that has sometimes been very helpful to kind of remember that image that, yeah, I'm the kid looking up and I don't see the pattern, but God knows what the pattern is. God has every piece of stitch work exactly where he wants it and so forth. And so on this side of eternity, I may never get to see what the picture looks like, but I have to trust that God is putting that picture together perfectly in the way that he wants it. And he's doing so because he loves me.
It's not our place to know everything.
Right.
I think that gets conflated sometimes. Where is your place in, is this cosmology?
It's probably more teleology. Like we're meaning seekers, but the problem is we also are limited responsible agents, which means we can't know everything, and God doesn't want us to know everything. All right, that's also part of his design, and we sometimes forget that in our attempts at meaning seeking. We aren't willing to admit that maybe we don't get to know the full meaning yet. You know, we see through a glass darkly, and we sometimes think, no, I'm going to try and polish the glass so I can see clearer. And it's like, that's not going to do it.
Know your place.
Yep.
How you doing, Sebastian?
I'm doing quite well. I don't know.
I think this is a stellar conversation.
Good question, Claire.
I'm feeling the thing that I feel sometimes when it's time to, sort of wind it down, right? That's like in Inception when the music starts to play. It's not over, right? But there's a knock on the door. You got any more fantastic prompts, Claire? She flips her notebook
Glad
over,
you asked.
turns
4 more pages.
I guess I wrote a note that says purpose doesn't have to come before action, and that attitudes can follow. And I think that's important to remember as someone who is taught often that, like, you can search deeper and find it and look for it. But sometimes the purpose isn't because you can describe it, it's because it's done by a masterful God, like it can be what it is without you having to know it. I guess.
That's regarding your place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can sort out how you feel about it after instead of, yeah.
You don't necessarily have to know right now
Mm-hmm.
why things are happening.
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful to be prepared, though, or to think. Well, no, just prepare your heart, Study, pray, so that you can be that for someone else, too. Can be of service for someone.
Yeah.
That's something that I feel like God sometimes is very mysterious about how he does things. But sometimes he's very obvious, and I think stuff like that is something that's been very evident in my life of where you go through something and you don't think about it, you're like, why did that happen? And then years later or months later, somebody comes to you with something they're going through and you're like, dude.
I unlocked this one 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, dude, I've been there.
Ago.
I've been there. I've done that searching. God has guided me through that, and then it makes sense. It's God used that moment in you so that he can use you in somebody else's life.
Yeah.
Right?
You have
and
a
it's
bunch
just
of gems you're collecting in your pocket, and you can kind of give them away.
Yeah, and it's it's so beautiful and a blessing to get to be God's tool in somebody else's life, and so beneficial for them and for yourself, just to get to see that moment of where you're God's using me, and it's not about me, it's about him, but he's using me. You're his child, you're special, and he's using you to do his work.
Yeah, there's a delight wrapped up in there. Me? Really? Wow. Thanks.
Well, and it reminds me of, I think it's Kierkegaard who said, life has to be lived forward, but it can be understood backwards. And so in that same way, when you're going through it, you're having to just live your life forward. You don't have the understanding. But years later, or maybe even just weeks later, when you look back, you're suddenly like, oh, that's how this may have equipped me, so that if someone else goes through the same thing, I can be a comfort to them. I can be an encourager and so forth. And so I think absolutely. And then sometimes you get those aha moments thank you, God. I didn't appreciate this at the time I was going through it, but I now understand how this can be used as a blessing for someone else.
I think suffering gets a bad rap. We're very interested in comfort and safety, and just understanding what suffering can produce, what kind of fruits suffering can produce, helps you to expect it, and helps you to, let's say, redeem it.
On the suffering note, I think I told Jenna Thompson one time that I don't remember what it was after, but just I had this thought of some of the world's greatest suffering has brought about the greatest beauty, and the greatest just pieces of art, the greatest organizations have come from these moments of intense
An invention.
Yeah, of intense suffering, and like you're saying, we see it as such a negative thing, and we try to avoid it, when really it's such a good thing.
It has potential, right? I don't wish it on anyone, but it can be redeemed.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys seen the thing that's about the guy who created plastic gloves was because his wife was a nurse?
No.
And she would come home with these chapped hands because of doing her nurse job, made her hands kind of destroyed.
Oh, wow.
So he invents latex gloves, right? And it's that whole concept that creation is the ultimate form of love. And I think the both of you right now are all three, the creation, we're all creating things, right? You're creating a model, you're creating sculptures, and that truly comes all back down to love, doesn't it?
I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Love and service. Yeah. And I respect you all very much.
That's my line.
Sorry, I'm just going to steal it.
Yeah. Well, Closing thoughts. I can feel the momentum. Benediction is at hand.
I don't know. How do you close a conversation that has been as far-ranging as this one in a nice, succinct way? I mean,
Think it's not a summary. Think what do you want our readers to hear? Send them a message.
Life is hard and God is good.
You made it! That's the end of this episode of Whistle the Feast. It was so nice to have you join the table. Whistle the Feast would definitely not be possible without all of the brilliant and delightful people and spaces at Bethany Lutheran College. Head on over to blc.edu to learn more about the college or schedule a visit. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any thoughts, questions, or feedback. We always love hearing from our community. You can send feedback directly about the show to feastreaders@gmail.com. A huge shout out to the wonderful people who stretch beyond this campus for sharing their thoughts with us, and our producer, Jaksyn Graham, for orchestrating the numerous edits. And with that, I'm Claire Marcus, alongside Jason Jaspersen, and we want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of Whistle the Feast. See you soon!
Get curious, be of good service, and discover what God has given you.